Did you know that when Squidward gets scared, he sprays out a huge amount of ink? One day, Patrick and SpongeBob were selling lemonade on the street. A curious customer drank the ink that Squidward had sprayed out, and he gave it a great review. So the two of them decided to start selling ink. To get more ink, Patrick used his already rotten body and rang the bell of wisdom. That's right, he planned to scare Squidward. His creepy appearance successfully scared Squidward. Just like that, Patrick successfully collected a bottle of ink. But there were too many customers, and that little bit of ink was nowhere near enough. So Patrick brought in a terrifying giant spider. Overwhelmed by fear, Squidward started spraying out ink non-stop. Soon, Patrick had collected 2 large cups of ink. As their business became wildly popular, Patrick built a terrifying haunted house. Squidward quickly fell into the trap. A creepy piece of music started playing. Squidward went forward to investigate. He got scared and started running around in panic. Unexpectedly, he saw the Krusty Krab 60 years in the future, and 60 years later, he still hadn't achieved financial freedom. He was still working as a cashier at the Krusty Krab. The extreme fear had an astonishing effect. In an instant, the boat was completely filled with ink. Squidward was so terrified that he crashed straight through the wall and escaped. That's when he saw SpongeBob and Patrick's stand. It turned out they had been selling his ink the whole time, so he immediately came up with a new idea. He set up his own stand and started selling ink. Just then, everyone finally realized that the drinks they had been drinking were actually Squidward's ink. They immediately rushed to Squidward's house and spit all the ink back out. To comfort Squidward, the two of them brought him a new flavored cookie. But what Squidward didn't know was that the cookies were actually made from spiders. This was the first time SpongeBob breathed fresh air, and he almost ended up meeting his maker. A place without seawater is basically hell for ocean creatures. One day, SpongeBob met Sandy. At Sandy's invitation, he went to her house. Sandy sucked all the air out from outside the door, and SpongeBob started to dry up. When Sandy opened the metal door, SpongeBob looked like a fish that had left the water. Because he didn't want to embarrass himself in front of Sandy, he could only pretend to stay calm. So, while Sandy wasn't paying attention, SpongeBob drained all the water from the pool. Outside, Patrick was still constantly encouraging SpongeBob, telling him to keep going. But SpongeBob had already reached his limit. Even his hands had started to become dried out. While Sandy was arranging flowers, SpongeBob immediately stood up and tried to leave. He walked to the door, but he couldn't open it. To keep his promise with Patrick, SpongeBob bravely returned to the table. Just then, Sandy came back carrying a vase. SpongeBob's attention was completely drawn to the vase. When Sandy turned around to get some cookies, he immediately grabbed the vase and drank all the water inside. Seeing this, Patrick quickly ran inside. He loudly questioned SpongeBob, asking why he couldn't overcome even this little challenge. As he said that, he tried to take SpongeBob back to his seat. But soon, he realized something was wrong too. He quickly ran to the door and wanted to leave. But the two of them had already lost almost all their strength. They couldn't open the door at all. When Sandy came back, she discovered that SpongeBob and Patrick had become dehydrated. Sandy quickly took out a hose and put helmets on them. This helped them return to normal. Finally, Sandy brought some tea to share with them. But with the helmets on, they couldn't drink the tea. So Sandy simply put the tea bags inside their helmets. That day, SpongeBob was making delicious Krabby Patties in his own unique way. A health inspector kicked open the door and walked in. The device in his hand showed that someone inside was infected with a virus. He immediately placed the Krusty Krab under complete lockdown. The entire Krusty Krab instantly fell into chaos. Mr. Krabs hid inside his office. Plankton escaped from a bottle of soda, but he was quickly taken care of. In order to find the infected person, Mr. Krabs started checking everyone one by one. Just then, SpongeBob suddenly sneezed. Everyone was terrified. To avoid causing trouble for others, SpongeBob volunteered to lock himself inside the freezer. Before leaving, he even said goodbye to Squidward. To keep SpongeBob company, Patrick disguised himself as an infected person. Soon, he was locked inside the freezer. At this moment, Squidward felt a little itchy on his skin and was suspected of having the flu. Squidward was also locked inside the freezer. Mrs. Puff yawned, and Mr. Krabs immediately locked her inside the freezer. Pearl returned the money to Mr. Krabs, but Mr. Krabs suspected that she was infected with the virus, so he locked Pearl inside as well. At this moment, Squidward discovered the problem. Everyone who had been locked inside the freezer was healthy. That meant the only infected person could be Mr. Krabs. Everyone decided to catch the real infected person. They rushed out of the freezer, but soon, something unexpected happened. While chasing Mr. Krabs, Squidward and him both fell into the sewer. Their bodies were covered in filth. During the chaos, more and more people became covered in the dirty substance. The next day, the inspector opened the door of the Krusty Krab and found complete chaos inside. Everyone's bodies had become infected, especially Mr. Krabs, whose entire body had started to rot. They were all infected with a virus far more serious than the flu. In the end, the inspector quarantined the entire Krusty Krab. Do you know the true identity of Patrick Star's grandfather? Back in medieval times, his grandfather was the greatest dentist in the kingdom. One day, a royal jellyfish delivered a letter from the palace. The letter said that the princess was suffering from a terrible toothache and requested Patrick's grandfather to come to the palace and treat her. The old man was extremely excited because being chosen to treat a member of the royal family meant his dental skills had reached the highest level. He immediately set off for the palace. The princess had already been waiting there for a long time. But the one suffering from the toothache was not the princess at all. It was her fire-breathing pet dragon. Patrick's grandfather's donkey was so terrified by the sight that it immediately ran away. Although the old man was also scared, he didn't want to disappoint the princess, so he gathered his courage and walked straight into the dragon's mouth. The next second, he pulled out a hammer and started tapping one of the dragon's teeth, but the dragon didn't feel anything, so the old man continued using the hammer to carefully examine its teeth. Suddenly, he discovered a soldier wearing armor. It turned out that the soldier and another companion had been trapped between the dragon's teeth for an entire 100 years. Following the soldier's directions, the old man made his way to the other side of the dragon's tongue. There, he discovered that one of the teeth was home to a group of bats. The old man took out his tools and prepared to remove the rotten tooth, but at that moment, the dragon suddenly breathed out another burst of fire. Luckily, the old man reacted quickly and dodged the attack. If he had known pulling a tooth would be this dangerous, he never would have come. So he asked the princess and the two soldiers for help. Just as they all started pulling together, the dragon released another blast of fire. In an instant, all of them were burned black. In the end, they successfully removed the bad tooth. The dragon happily flew around in the sky. Later, Patrick's grandfather opened a clinic, and that rotten tooth has been carefully kept all the way until today. SpongeBob has actually become a doctor. He pulled every bone out of a patient with a broken leg. Then he forcefully stuffed an entire fish skeleton into the patient's body. To everyone's surprise, the patient made a full recovery. One day, SpongeBob volunteered at the hospital. A nurse handed him a hospital uniform, but he didn't like the stripes on it, so he simply ate them all. Without the stripes, he looked exactly like a real doctor. The doctors immediately took him on their rounds. The first patient had a terrible sore throat. The two doctors were discussing whether he needed a tracheotomy. SpongeBob said there was no need for surgery. He reached straight into the catfish's mouth and started feeling around. SpongeBob tasted it and instantly figured out the problem. He asked one of the doctors to bring him a chicken that could lay eggs. Then he plucked a feather. He used it to tickle the catfish's foot. The catfish couldn't hold back a huge sneeze. A giant ring of keys shot right out of his throat. The real problem was that the keys had been stuck there all along. To finish the treatment, SpongeBob prescribed a Krabby Patty. The next patient was Mrs. Puff. Her body kept inflating uncontrollably. She had to stay inside a giant metal tank for treatment. Without saying a word, SpongeBob jumped onto the machine. He immediately started pulling the control levers. The next second, Mrs. Puff blasted out of control. Miraculously, she suddenly felt completely normal again. The two doctors were amazed by SpongeBob's skills. They decided to let him perform the hospital's most difficult plastic surgery. Meanwhile, Squidward was enjoying a relaxing massage before the operation. SpongeBob walked into the operating room wearing surgical scrubs. Squidward was completely stunned. Before he could even object, the anesthesia kicked in. He passed out instantly. Next came the surgical tools. Being a fry cook, SpongeBob didn't hesitate for a second. He grabbed his favorite spatula. He spun it around with incredible confidence. The doctors all gave him a thumbs up. The operation officially began. Squidward's organs and ink flew everywhere. SpongeBob kept apologizing the whole time, but his hands never stopped moving. He even managed to make a plate of octopus sashimi along the way. Then he grabbed a giant saw and started cutting. By the end, only Squidward's head was left. Yet somehow, his nose hadn't been touched. SpongeBob had no choice but to start over. He somehow ended up making a hamburger instead. The doctors burst into applause. Then SpongeBob discovered something stuck inside Squidward's nose. He gave it a hard pull. Out came a doctor's notebook that had been left behind. SpongeBob was sweating buckets. The nurse tore off a piece of her own sponge body and used it to wipe his sweat away. Just then, another doctor suddenly fell from above. He flew straight into Squidward's nose. Luckily, SpongeBob solved the problem with one swing of his spatula. The surgery was finally over. The nurse woke Squidward up. SpongeBob handed him a mirror. The moment Squidward looked at himself, he completely lost it. His nose was even bigger than before. Just as he was about to demand a different doctor, SpongeBob told the nurse to give him another shot of anesthesia. SpongeBob spent the next several rounds making adjustment after adjustment. One bizarre nose design followed another. They attached just about everything imaginable to his nose. Squidward was terrified. He begged SpongeBob to stop experimenting on him. In the end, his nose was finally restored to its original shape. This time, Squidward was satisfied. Unfortunately, the rest of his body had been completely wrecked. Just then, SpongeBob's alarm clock went off. It was time for him to head to work. Only then did the doctors realize the truth. SpongeBob wasn't a doctor at all. He was just a fry cook.